Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to EduSat Live Lectures. Dear friends, today's topic for discussion is Gandhi and the Indian tradition, Swaraj, Satyagraha, Yama and Niyama. To discuss this topic, we have with us our subject expert, Professor Bindu Puri. Professor Puri is associated with Center for Philosophy in School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Without further ado, I would like to welcome ma'am to our studios and request her to start the lecture. Welcome ma'am.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak today on Gandhi and the Indian tradition, which is, and I'm looking at Swaraj, Satyagraha, Yama and Niyama. Now, the last 4 or 5 decades have been witness to a growing interest in Gandhi in the academic curriculum. What I'm going to talk about today is Gandhi and the Indian philosophical tradition. The philosophical influences on Gandhi have been traced by scholars and philosophers to both the Indian and the Western tradition. So, in the Indian tradition, we talk about the influence of Jainism, Gita and Ramayana. In the Western tradition, we talk about the influence of Tolstoy, Socrates, Christianity, especially the Sermon on the Mount and Ruskin. However, it is part of my argument here that though Gandhi engaged with arguments and insights from the Western philosophical tradition, he was very much at home in the Astic, in the orthodox Indian philosophical tradition, and especially 2 classical texts, that is the Gita and the Yoga Sutra. In 1930, he wrote a series of letters to the inmates of the Sabarmati ashram, in which he tried to explain the meaning of the Gita in simple language. This is better known, but what is lesser known is that Gandhi also had about 200 references to the Yoga Sutras and to Bhagwan Patanjali in the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi. So, I would like to argue that many of the important concepts in terms of which Gandhi thought and in terms of which he participated in politics, these were drawn from his engagement and dialogue with the classical, orthodox or Astic tradition in Indian philosophy. And this is lesser known. So, how should we look at Gandhi's relationship to the Indian philosophical tradition? The first thing to do is, of course, to look at, say, what is meant by a tradition. Ginsberg talks about tradition as saying that by tradition is meant the sum of all ideas, habits and customs that belong to a people and are transmitted from generation to generation. Now, Pratima Bowes highlights the absence of rigidity in the orthodox Hindu tradition by talking about the Hindu tradition as diffused and far-flung. She also argues that, in the case of Hinduism, Hinduism was not associated with any single teacher or prophet, and so sometimes the term Hinduism is used for the whole cultural tradition of the Hindus, and it was much more of an open tradition. Gandhi's relationship to this Astic tradition of Indian philosophy has been the subject of diverse interpretation. Sometimes, Gandhi is seen as in continuity with the classical Indian tradition, and Gandhi himself spoke about the influence of tradition and heredity in shaping a child and an adult's life. But on the other hand, there have been 2 strands in Gandhi which have led to some kind of alienation from the orthodox. First is that his attitude towards other religions was loving and ahimsa, and secondly, he had a very strong reformist zeal, especially regarding untouchability, and this sometimes alienated Gandhi from orthodox Hindus. Now, it is certainly the case that Gandhi was a reformer, and in that sense you can't call him a traditionalist or say that he is blindly reiterating the classical Hindu tradition. But at the same time, we cannot deny that Gandhi was in some kind of dialogue with that tradition, and many times his ideas were kind of creative reinterpretation of that tradition. Gandhi's relationship with Gita has been well known, but the relationship with Yoga Sutra is less known. Now, in this talk, I'll focus on three central Gandhian concepts which were developed as a result of such a critical dialogue. The first is what Gandhi speaks about as virtues, and these are nothing but what are called the Yam Niyam. They were called vows in the classical Indian Astic tradition, and the Yam Niyam formed an important part of the moral training which was essential for all individual beings. According to Gandhi, they were absolutely mandatory for Satyagrahis and for ashram residents. Second thing I'm going to talk about is Swaraj, which Gandhi talks about as early as 1909, and he talks about it in terms of self-rule as well as in terms of home rule. And the third concept I'm going to talk about is the notion of Satyagraha in Gandhi. Now, to begin with, let's look at the fact that in 1909 itself, when Gandhi spoke about Hind Swaraj, in Hind Swaraj, he made three things clear about Swaraj. Gandhi thought of free India as an India built around ancient civilizational values, and this is why you see that Gandhi spoke, Gandhi spoke about Swaraj in terms, by criticizing the ideas of modern civilization in Hind Swaraj. Now, in 1909, when Gandhi wrote the Hind Swaraj, he made a distinction between self-rule and home rule. And he said that self-rule is, absolutely essential for collective home rule. So, he established a conceptual link between his politics and the ancient Indian philosophical tradition, which had been preoccupied with the idea of self-rule as a means to spiritual freedom. This was the second theme about Swaraj that you can see in Hind Swaraj. The third theme was that Gandhi, made no distinction between means and ends. So he said that you can only get Swaraj as a kind of collective freedom, provided the means used to establish that freedom are, essentially pure means. And so they have to be non-violent means, so that the end that is achieved is self-rule of individuals and collectively home rule for India. Now, looking at this kind of thinking about freedom, this section of my talk, I want to look at what are the influences working on Gandhi, especially from the Bhagavad Gita and also from the Yoga Sutras. Now, as I said, in 1930, Gandhi had given a series of lectures about Bhagavad Gita to the inmates of Sabarmati Ashram, and his, thinking about politics was influenced by the Gita. And I'm going to, talk about three central kind of points of special mention over here. The first one was that there was the idea of the Sthita Pragya in the Gita as the self-ruled person. And this had a lot of influence on Gandhi's understanding of Swaraj. The second theme in the Gita which influenced him was the fact that the Gita promoted equality of all varnas and genders as it was written for all to read. And last theme in the Gita was that one could attain moksha or spiritual freedom through disinterested action or nishkam karma, yoga. The last idea had a distinct influence on the connection that Gandhi made between Satyagraha and Swaraj. So to begin with, let's look at the influences on the verses on the Sthita Pragya on Gandhi's notion of Swaraj. Gandhi had emphasized time and again that freedom for India could not be achieved unless every individual person became self-ruled. And he said, and I'm quoting from Gandhi, quote, Swaraj of a people means the sum total of Swaraj of individuals. Then he also said, real home rule is self-rule or self-control. Gandhi, again and again said that self-rule of individuals means control of the self, and it is only if individuals are self-controlled and there is a rule of the self by the self that we can speak about collective freedom as home rule. Now, how should we understand self-rule as an inner freedom? You can understand this if it is read in the context of the relationship with the Gita and Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Gandhi often emphasized the need to control an over-assertive sense of the self in the individual's mind and its ideas. In fact, Anthony Parel, in his translation of the Hind Swaraj, says that the Gujarati text reads that one's rule over one's own mind is real Swaraj. Now, what does all this mean? It is actually at this point that Gandhi's continuity with the Indian tradition becomes most apparent, because when Gandhi talks about self-rule, he makes a clear distinction between the individual's higher self and the mind and the body. It is interesting that Gandhi seems to be using the metaphor of the Atma, which had dominated classical Indian ethics, to indicate the moral possibility that every individual should develop a form of free personhood which is progressively closer to Sat or truth. And we must also remember that Gandhi equated Sat or truth with God. And in 1921, he famously said that, instead of saying that God is truth, we are going to say truth is God. Now, it is interesting to note that this whole idea of the self-ruled person as somebody who has a control of the mind and the body also is powerfully influenced by the Sthita Pragya. Gandhi has written a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, and he talks about the Sthita Pragya in the following manner, and I am quoting him over here. Quote, "He whose self abides content in itself is known as the Sthita Pragya." Gandhi also says that such a person would have a resolute intellect and be untroubled by extremes of emotions and desires. The connection between Gandhi's conception of the Satyagrahi as the individual on the path to self-rule and the Sthita Pragya becomes clear when you note that Gandhi said that a person who is attached to enjoyment of the senses and possession of power will not have a mind, quote, plain white like khadi, unquote. For such a person would be, quote, ever wanting to dress his mind as fashionable women do their bodies. And you see how Gandhi insisted on the white khadi as an outward symbol of inner purity and self-restraint. Now, the Satyagrahi as a person who's kind of aiming for this kind of self-restrained life is certainly not the Sthita Pragya, but he's certainly someone who is, trying to control the mind and the body. Now, this makes it clear that Gandhi is comfortable with an understanding of Swaraj or individual freedom, which is based on a dialogue with collective memory and collective understanding as embodied in the Indian philosophical tradition. However, it is important to note that this is a dialogue. This is not just a reiteration, It is like a creative reinterpretation of these ideas which he finds in the Gita and in the Yoga Sutra, and also other ideas that he is drawing from perhaps the Western philosophical tradition. Because Gandhi is not thinking of individual self-rule as moksha, but he is thinking of it as the development of a form of non-egoistic personhood in the interest of securing the well-being of all Indians collectively. So this is, as far as my argument about the influence of the ideal of the Sthita Pragya on Gandhi's understanding of Swaraj as self-rule and home rule is concerned. But there's another strand in the Bhagavad Gita which influences Gandhi, and that is the idea of equality. So he says, and I'm quoting Gandhi, quote, "The Gita was written not for the learned, but for all the four castes, rather for all the 18 castes to read and understand. It was written for the Shudras, the Bhangis, and for the women," unquote. Gandhi went on to draw from the teaching of the Gita to develop the value of equality from intellectual resources within Hinduism. And again, I'm quoting from Gandhi. He says, "If it is only if we have faith in our hearts that we are all one, though we exist as separate beings, it is only then that we can feel a sense of equality. Otherwise, even two leaves are not equal," unquote. So this is the second lesson. A third lesson that Gandhi seems to directly draw from the Bhagavad Gita is that the Gita, had recommended disinterested action, to achieve kind of spiritual realization. And from there, Gandhi draws the idea that if you have disinterested action in the form of, let's say, Satyagraha, then you can progress on the path of individual self-rule as well as collective self-rule. So, linking knowledge and action in line with Sri Krishna's advice to Arjun in the Gita, Gandhi emphasized on the need for an individual to act as one who understood what was meant by a good human life. In his commentary on the Gita, as a matter of fact, Gandhi said, and I am quoting from that commentary, quote, "All that Sri Krishna means is this. I have explained the matter to you from a theoretical point of view. I pointed out the difference between the Atma and the body. Having explained this to you, I will now put the argument with reference to Yoga. Yoga means practice. After understanding this, you will have to translate your knowledge into action in the manner I shall explain. Since we know that Atma is different from the body, we can act every moment on this assurance." Now, Gandhi had constructed a new Yug Dharma for Indians confronted with the crisis of colonialism from the Nishkam Karma of the Gita, arguing that if we do not let the senses distract the mind, then we can become fit for Satyagraha. So, one can argue that Gandhi established a continuity between spiritual realization as the end of the properly human life and the ideal of Satyagraha, the ideal of Swaraj or self-rule that he sought for all individuals, Indians, and also home rule, which he sought for all Indians collectively by recommending disinterested action in the form of Satyagraha as the means to free India. And he often said that the way that we should know God is not to sit cross-legged but to work in a disinterested spirit. The Gandhian Satyagrahi who adhered non-violently to truth could progress on the path to freedom as self-rule and home rule only by following physical and moral discipline. So Gandhi spoke about moral discipline also, and in this sense he spoke about controlling self-indulgence by what he called the practice of the virtues, and these he spoke about as the Yama and Niyama, which are present in the Yoga Sutra, and they are present in the orthodox Indian tradition, only thing is that in the Yoga Sutra you do not find the word virtue, and you don't find it in the Indian tradition also. You find the word vrata or vow. Gandhi kind of creatively engaged in a discourse with these classical texts, and he invented the concept of virtue, drawing on these Yama and Niyams, and he said, look, if you practice these Yama and Niyams, you will be able to control the mind and the body, and that will take you to self-rule as individual freedom, and it is on the basis of self-rule of every individual Indian that you can have collective home rule for all Indians, that is freedom, political freedom. So, now I am just going to talk about the influence of the Yoga Sutras on Gandhi, because the Yama and Niyama actually, though they are given by the Jains in the Akaranga Sutras, they are powerfully reiterated by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, and Gandhi himself often refers to Patanjali as a source of his understanding of the Yama and Niyama, especially of ahimsa or non-violence. Now, as noted earlier in my talk, there are over 200 references to Gandhi, to the Yoga Sutras in the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi. And in 1946, Gandhi said that many years ago, a friend of his used to carry Patanjali's Yoga Sutras constantly in his pocket. Although Gandhi did not know Sanskrit, the friend used to come to him and ask him to interpret the meaning of these, and Gandhi would sort of try to interpret the meaning of these. And Gandhi also said in 1926, quote, "Patanjali is responsible for the scientific discovery of ahimsa," unquote. Now, the concept of virtue in Gandhi. Interestingly, Gandhi spoke about the virtues, cardinal and casual, as being necessary for leading a good human life. He also reiterated the need to take vows to practice virtues. The Gandhian virtues were derived directly from the Yama and Niyama, like I said, And I'm just going to, tell you what he said about this in the collected works. The prince of yogis, Patanjali, gave the first place to Yama and Niyama and held as eligible for yogic practices only those who have gone through the preliminary discipline. And this preliminary discipline was to follow vows according to Patanjali, but Gandhi said, reinterpreted this to mean virtue or dispositions of character. So you had to, sort of become established in living a life where you could exhibit this kind of control over yourself, that you would follow what he calls cardinal and casual virtues. And the 5 cardinal virtues were, and I'm quoting from the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi: non-violence, truth, non-stealing, celibacy, non-possession. There were also 5 casual virtues or niyams. These were bodily purity, contentment, study of scriptures, austerity, meditation on God. And later on he sort of extended this to bring in swadeshi, bread labor, control of palate, and so on. So Gandhi reinterpreted the tradition of Indian philosophy, the Astic tradition, orthodox tradition. He took the concept of the vratas, he reinvented them as virtues, and he said everybody has to follow these virtues, only then they can become self-controlled, only then they can achieve individual freedom. Now, there's another strand in the Yoga Sutras which has influenced all this in Gandhi, and that is the fact that the yoga makes a distinction between the mind and the body and what it calls the true self or the Purusha. Now, Gandhi comments on one of the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Chitta Vriddhi Nirodha, and he says, and I'm quoting Gandhi, if the waves are continually rising, we describe the sea as stormy. There is no essential difference between the sea and the waves in it. Telling himself this, a man may become steady in mind and let the wave of desire subside in it. Patanjali tells us that if we restrain the waves from rising, we shall know whether the master of the chitta is desire or whether it is God, unquote. So the second point now of influence of the yoga on Gandhi comes from this distinction between the mind, body and the Purush. For Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra, the mind and the body belong to Prakriti, and man's self is called Purush, and this self comes out clearly when you restrain the body by discipline, you restrain the mind by discipline, and then only you can know what the true self is. But for Patanjali, even this knowledge of yourself is mediated by the mind and body, and therefore you always need to make sure that the mind is kept still and the body is kept pure. So therefore you see the influence of Patanjali on Gandhi's continuous desire to keep the body and mind under control by fasting and so on, right? So though Gandhi might certainly not have accepted the metaphysical assumptions of the yoga, he uses the metaphor of the Atma. He is influenced by the distinction between the mind and the true self. It is possible to argue that Gandhi saw individual moral life as a struggle between the self as a form of personhood with a potential for progressive moral perfection and the powerful tendencies of the ego, which obstructed the inherently benign nature of the self. So Gandhi can be philosophically interpreted as having equated the mind or cogito with the seat of the sense of the ego, and ego-generated desires, passions, and deceptions. In itself, this need not appear philosophically puzzling, because Descartes, the famous philosopher, also speaks about the cogito as the source of the knowledge of the I. So the individual self for Gandhi might not have been Patanjali's Purush, but it was the self that existed just as it was, quite apart from egoistic and essentially deceptive impulses. To be able to see the self clearly was to be free of deception. This knowledge of the self as it was in truth was individual freedom in Gandhi. And in this you see a powerful influence of the yoga. And it is also perhaps in this context that we can understand all Gandhi's emphasis on Swaraj as self-control or control of the body and the mind by the higher self, or what he calls self-mastery. And so Gandhi speaks about self-mastery as restraint of egoistic impulses and desires, and he says, and I am quoting him, even on the knowledge of the self within presupposes a pure heart, which in its turn depends on the practice of the Yama and Niyama, the cardinal and casual virtues. So, of course, it's not just the yoga which speaks about Yama and Niyama. All the Astic schools of Indian philosophy, including and also Jainism, Buddhism, speak about the Yama and Niyama as vows. But the fact that Gandhi accepted these as cardinal and casual virtues expresses his appreciation of the role of tradition as an inherited set of values and an initial starting point in individual moral life. In that sense, it can be said that for Gandhi, one could not take an entirely ahistorical view of the individual's life. There is a sense of respect for the tradition of inherited moral practices and values which constitute the starting point of an individual's moral life as essentially socially embedded. However, it should be also noted that Gandhi's interpretation of the yam of the Indian tradition as virtues does not mean an unimaginative reiteration of the past, but it simply means that Gandhi entered into a dialogue with the past and he reinvented traditional and received understandings of moral concepts. So, in conclusion, we can argue that Gandhi philosophically engaged with the intellectual resources of the Indian philosophical Astic tradition, and he drew arguments and ideas from there, which he employed in his thinking and in his political practice. There is a continuity between India's philosophical past and present in Gandhian thought. Gandhi did not want to build free India, Hind Swaraj, on the basis of an intellectual rupture with India's past. His political activism established a conceptual link with India's past and a practical continuity from the pre-modern village community to an Indian nation state. You have the idea of Panchayati Raj as a mediator. So the fact that Gandhi's India did not require the Indian masses to forget their past and reinvent themselves as moderns, for which the poor were in any case ill-equipped, is itself significant. For one may note, there can be tremendous difficulties in having to build on a complete conceptual rejection of everything one has known in the past. By establishing a continuity while reinventing traditional concepts, Gandhi erased the modern need to forget. And I think we should, appreciate the link and the continuity that is there between Gandhi and the Astic, orthodox Indian philosophical tradition. And I hope that all these ideas have helped you to have some understanding of that. Thank you.
Ma'am, I would just ask you to, if you could just elaborate this idea of Sthit Pragya for us, so that how in Indian freedom struggle, this whole idea of Sthit Pragya that gives the individual an agency to act as a freedom fighter per se, how does this whole Sthit Pragya concept fits into that in Gandhi's struggle for freedom?
Yeah, no, actually Mahatma Gandhi in 1930, he wrote letters to people who were living at Sabarmati Ashram. He wrote about the Gita, and those verses about the self-ruled person or the Sthita Pragya, as the person who had control of the body and the mind, and there was a kind of a higher self or an Atma which is referred to. Now this person then became a man who was settled in himself, who was not kind of tossed around by the extremes of emotions. Now this idea had a powerful influence on Gandhi. He thought about this idea, and actually for many years he recited these verses for himself. I think that he had a kind of interesting dialogue with that idea, And when he thought about Swaraj as self-rule, and he kept on speaking about the self-control man, the man who, was in control of his emotions, he was influenced by that dialogue which he had with the Bhagavad Gita in his own mind.
Ma'am, my question to you was, if I can again elaborate on it, the sthit pragya as an idea is that one is settled in oneself, so that the its surroundings do not affect her. The person is then hence develops an agency in herself. So if this is the idea that we're carrying, then does the sthit pragya not make any person a satyagrahi in herself?
No, the point is that you're asking me, how does this influence the idea of Swaraj, right?
How does
this
it
influence
makes
the idea of
it makes you and me a satyagrahi, the sthit pragya?
No, because the Satyagraha is the person who has to be ready to withstand lot of physical difficulty and lot of emotional difficulty, right? And now how is the person to do that? The person is going to be able to do that if he makes a distinction between the body and the mind and his own higher self. And how does he get the intellectual resource to do that? But from his own Indian philosophical past.
True.
And so that is why I'm saying that I think this idea had a lot of influence on Gandhi's, political philosophy and political ideas. He was inspiring people to do satyagraha, to face difficulties. Now, how is he going to do that? By bringing in these, concepts from India's philosophical past.
Ji. Ma'am, one question that arises from it, that Gita was interpreted not by Gandhi but by Tilak as well.
Yeah.
Gita was interpreted numbers of time. What's in there in Gita that makes it so appealing to all these men, and that it actually makes them a call for a freedom struggle, that actually influences them to the extent that they wrote commentary, and they wrote quite influencing commentary in their own right. What is it in Gita that actually makes it so appealing?
The Gita is like a philosophy of action in the midst of strife, in the midst of war. So one is the setting. So the Gita doesn't speak about an ideal sort of situation. The Gita speaks about being in a position of war, in a position of strife, in a position where you are, which is somewhat analogous, similar to what kind of positions we find ourselves in our own lives, right? Strife, war, difficulty. And in that situation, the Gita tells you that the best way out is to perform disinterested action, right? That eventually you have to keep, you have to live in the interest of truth. You have to, perform action in the interest of truth, and that you should not be interested only in personal or self-servicing actions. And this philosophy then appeals to people as really being the best way out of the struggles in which we find ourselves. And of course, when we look at contemporary political scenario, we may not feel that it's very influential, but a person like Gandhi, it shines through his life.
True.
Because he never wanted to do anything in the interest of his own person or to service his own wishes. It was mostly action done in the interest of public collective good.
Okay, ma'am, when we were talking about Yama and Niyam, what I understood from it was that Yama and Niyam is kind of a principled living, that one leads a principled life. Does that make Gandhi a disciplinarian?
Yeah, certainly, very much of a disciplinarian. I think he was, with himself certainly, because he had this strong sense that everybody should follow truth, not only truth and non-violence, but also brahmacharya or celibacy.
True.
Right? And be engaged in physical labor for one, be in, following Swadeshi. So he put a lot of emphasis on leading restrained life. So there is, you're right, he's a disciplinarian.
Because if I can just add a pointer into it, when you read collected works of Gandhi, you come across tons of letters that he has written to his followers, to his friends, asking them, rather literally instructing them how to live a life.
Yeah.
He does that. So and then again his ashrams and all those curriculum he had developed over a period of time. So in a sense that he does he fall back onto these ideas to justify himself in terms of a disciplinarian, that see this is
No,
what
I think
has
Gandhi
happened
is trying to give a message that eventually what matters in human life is that it's an opportunity for you to come closer towards truth. Now, truth not only as God, but transparency. So that you ought to be very honest to yourself, honest to other people, that you shouldn't be deceiving yourself, and that eventually what matters is not following what your ego tells you to do to promote yourself, but eventually what matters is being honest to all the moral possibilities which exist in you as a human being. So as a human being, you can be much better than you are. So Gandhi is trying to point out to you that why not try to be a good person? Why not try to forget about yourself and be the best person that you can?
Okay, ma'am. Again, if we can talk about it, that this whole idea of Swaraj and self-rule, if one see this, Gandhi is talking about Indian freedom struggle at some point, obviously at very many points, but at the end of it, he's talking about an individual's strive, individual struggle to a moral high. Does that not make Gandhi more kind of universal than rooting him into a Indian freedom struggle? Is it not just for Indian and for the outsiders as well who wants to hear, who wants to take anything from Gandhi?
No, certainly I think Gandhi has a universal relevance because absolutely anyone in the world in any context can find themselves in a struggle between doing the right thing and doing the self-serving thing. And so that way Gandhi is universal. Even if you are in any position of authority at any point of time and you are called to make a decision, then you will feel the attraction of doing something that will promote yourself, that will serve your interest. And if you think in Gandhian lines, then you will think that, am I doing justice to myself? And that eventually as a human being, don't I have higher moral possibilities? And isn't it more important to be able to actualize my own moral possibilities? And aren't I deceiving myself when I'm just lost in doing all kinds of things to serve a very, very narrow self-interest which I see at this moment? And when I'm doing that, I'm actually destroying all the moral possibilities that exist in me as a human being. And I'm systematically destroying them every day. And I'm making myself into something much less than what I could be. So, I mean, if you look at it like that, then it's a message to all of us that, we could build a world where people were much more human. And in a sense, people no longer think about about themselves, about what are they becoming by their choices. And Gandhi is trying to stress on you that whatever you do, whatever choices you make, eventually make you, more human. And Gandhi actually says that ahimsa and truth come naturally to man, and that they are swabhav, or man's essential nature.
Ma'am, again, I have two questions which for me emanates from it, that Gandhi was equally influenced by Christian philosophy. Gandhi was equally influenced by Tolstoy, Sermon on the Mount, and Ruskin and Thoreau. If I ask you, this is a difficult one, I know. If I ask you to quantify, was he more influenced by Indian philosophy or Western philosophy, what would you say?
Well, I would say that look at the Indian philosophical tradition. Look at the orthodox tradition. There are 6 orthodox systems of Indian philosophy. So, Indian philosophical tradition, though people think it's a very closed tradition, it's a very, very open tradition. So, one side you have the Sankhya, which is dualistic and speaks about Prakriti and Purush. On the other side, you have Advaita Vedanta, which is completely monistic. And these are all orthodox systems, and they all claim to be true to the Veda. So, I mean, here you have a very plural, I mean, a very open tradition. So, Gandhi is actually exhibiting the spirit of the Indian philosophical tradition when he engages in dialogue with so many other traditions and is open to influence.
And hence,
I would say he is a true Hindu.
Okay, so that actually makes him as Akil Bilgrami would say, that the idea of Syadvad, that if I am right does not make you wrong, in that sense that
that is Akil is really talking about the influence of Jainism on Gandhi, and Akil sees the influence of Anekantvad and Syadvad as very powerfully there on Gandhi, and which is why Gandhi can look at other religions as different paths, all converging on the same.
And that actually makes him to accept the various ideas,
and
whatever he
Gandhi
can
is very
pick from
influenced by
him.
Jainism.
He
is very open to Jainism.
So would you say that he was more influenced by Indian philosophy than Western philosophy?
Well, I would say that he was just truly a Hindu in that he was very much open about ideas, and he entered into a critical discourse with both Indian and Western traditions. But it's difficult to say he was more influenced by Western philosophy, because Gandhi was truly Indian. He rejected Western civilization. He rejected, centralized form of government. In Hind Swaraj, he recommended that we should build an India in continuity with India's past, and that we should develop Panchayati Raj. So you can see at all points that Gandhi is very close to Indian civilization, to India's past, and he wishes a free India to be an India which is in continuity with the philosophical, intellectual past of India. So I would say certainly he is more influenced by the Indian tradition, even though he is open to dialogue with the Western tradition.
Ma'am, if we can take it from here, then did Gandhi, in a way, when he developed his own political stances, when he developed his own political ideas, did he apply philosophy to politics?
Yeah, well, he was not a trained philosopher, but certainly there is a philosophical vision which can be reconstructed from his arguments, his ideas, his writing and his practice. So certainly he had a well thought out philosophical vision that informed his political practice. So it wasn't like he just went blindly and did whatever seemed expedient at that point of time. No. He had a certain philosophical moral vision that sort of informed all the engagement in politics. So for example, he was so influenced by the model idea of ahimsa that he called off the movement for India's freedom when there was an incident at Chauri Chaura and several policemen were burnt. So he called off the movement. So you see that there is a philosophical vision that is informing his engagement in politics.
If again, that actually questions the relevance of philosophy in politics. When we can pick up the example of Gandhi for that matter, that a philosophically high ground one can have, and then even then you can engage in the mass politics as Gandhi did. But did it not in certain ways made his profession of politics, the chosen profession of politics, slightly difficult for him than for others? Because they were not claiming for the moral high ground as he was, and he actually at times did get into some tricky situations, though he did get out of them by his own improvisations.
Actually, Gandhi, in 1940, I think it was, he made a speech to the Khadi Sevak Sangh, and at that point he said, he clarified what he means by politics. He made a distinction between what he calls true politics and power politics, and he said, look, what is politics? True politics is the politics of service, where you want to engage with society so you can reconstruct it, so that you can serve people, and power politics is nothing but the politics of securing positions of power. And he said, I'm not interested in power politics. What I'm doing is true politics, that is a politics of service.
Okay.
So, I mean, he was pretty clear that he is not engaged in power politics.
But when one reads Gandhi, and there's a very heavy dose of philosophy in Gandhi, very heavy doses of philosophy in Gandhi, and it at times is difficult for n number of people to follow him, essentially because his philosophical ideas are so complex to understand. In that sense, if you think of the 90s, early 1900s, and the freedom struggle in India, in a way, philosophy did actually help. Did it not, in certain way, help Gandhi reinforce Gandhi's Mahatma image, the way he would eulogize from various things, and from Gita, from various other texts, that it actually reinforced his Mahatma image for masses, a large number of illiterate masses.
Well, I guess certainly, I mean, though he himself was quite clear that that he is not a Mahatma, and a large part of the autobiography, he very clearly said in the preface, look, the reason I am telling you all my failures so honestly is so that you know that I'm just an ordinary guy, and if I can do this, then anybody can do this. So he was very keen to expose his faults. He was honest to a fault, and people could not understand why he wants to speak about all his defects. And particularly, you know, to be able to be that honest, try to be that honest with yourself, let alone honest with so many people. So I don't think he wanted to say that I'm a Mahatma. But yes, certainly, the fact that he was, you know, there's this very nice novel by Raja Rao called Kanthapura, which explores how Gandhi had an impact on the rural masses. And that the fact that he was in this kind of an interesting continuity with the Ramayana and the Gita and so on, it captured their imagination. They could understand Gandhi because he came from that, he used the same language that they were familiar with. So he was so understandable to them. Now if Gandhi spoke to them about the Sermon on the Mount or about you know, Tolstoy or Ruskin, they wouldn't have understood him. So in that sense, Gandhi is truly Indian.
So in that sense, if I can actually elaborate on your argument, in that sense that Gandhi argued in Indian philosophical terms, he made him more appealable to the masses.
Yeah, except that he didn't argue in Indian philosophical terms so that he could be more appealable. I think he just thought in that manner.
True.
Yeah, because he often said that the role of tradition, of inherited values, on an individual's life is very, very important, and that you know, we can't neglect the role of tradition, the kind of influence it has on who you are. So you shouldn't reject your past.
Okay, ma'am, actually it was very enriching and very thoughtful discussion we had. Friends, I hope that you liked the discussion that we had today, and it actually sheds light on Gandhi's philosophical understanding, his own philosophy as it was, and I hope that you actually liked it, and you actually find it very informative as I did. So I would like to thank ma'am for this discussion, and thank you friends for watching today's show. Thanks a lot and keep watching. Thank you.